All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Evanston Plan Commission meeting for Wednesday, February 12th, 2020. First order of business is determining whether we have a quorum. Ms. Jones, can you take the roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Draper?
Here.
Commissioner Goddard?
Here.
Commissioner Halleck? Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Pagotzi? Commissioner Sloss?
Here.
Commissioner Hugo?
Here.
And Chair Isaac.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Next order of business is approval of the meeting minutes of January 22nd, 2020. Are there any comments or corrections from the commission?
There's a reference, and I can't find it here, to the round table, and that should be a capital R, referring to the Evanston Media.
Okay, any other comments or corrections? All right, hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended by Commissioner Goddard?
So move.
Is there a second? Sloss, second. All in favor?
Aye.
All against? All right, it's unanimous with Chair Isaac abstaining for having not been at that meeting. Next order of business is old business. It's a text amendment with respect to ground floor retail uses in the downtown districts. It's 19 PLND-0107. Ms. Jones, you'll be presenting?
Yes. Okay, I think maybe everyone except for one person was here at the meeting that this discussion began. Generally, what was proposed was to kind of clarify some of the more pedestrian-friendly uses that we wanted to have within the D2 downtown retail core district. So real quick, the existing regulations within the D2, the general purpose of it is stated here, to define and support the traditional downtown retail shopping function of Evanston. The district is characterized by street-level retail storefronts and structures that accent, a pedestrian scale. Mixed-use development shall be encouraged within the district, as shall the reuse of structures that assist in perpetuating the established pedestrian retail character in terms of scale, architecture, and street front continuity, as identified in the adopted plan for downtown Evanston. There is also regulation within the existing regulations. It's a provision that requires that a minimum of 75% of every building's sidewalk grade level exterior be devoted to some kind of retail trade activity. Unfortunately, the zoning ordinance does not actually define retail trade activity. So at the January 8th meeting, the commission began discussion on the proposed amendment that was brought forth, and the suggestion came about that various types of financial institutions should be separated out, basically as there are certain aspects of financial institutions that do encourage some pedestrian activity, such as ATM use, general checking and savings activities, and things of that nature. So this map outlines where the existing D2 districts are, generally in the western part of downtown along Davis Street, the southern end, actually including part of Fountain Square, and then north along the northern end of the downtown area, which would include Sherman and some of that traditional shopping district area in that particular portion. So what we are proposing, the updated proposal, we would keep this particular section of 61132, where we have renamed that to active use of grade level. It didn't seem like anyone took in a special issue with this particular section, but where we will be proposing updates to the amendment would be within the permitted and special uses within the D2. So specifically, where it says financial institutions, we would be changing the specific language to within the permitted uses. When located above the ground floor or at the ground floor, when retail banking services such as checking and savings accounts, debit and credit card uses, and ATMs are provided. And then kind of similarly along those lines within the special use, we added language where we say a financial institution would be a special use at the ground floor when retail banking services are not provided. So generally, we have the 4 standards for text amendments, which we can go over once we have done some additional discussion. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Jones. Any questions from the commission of staff with respect to their presentation? Okay, hearing none. Are there any questions from the public with respect to the presentation? All right, hearing none there. Any comments from the public with respect to the presentation? Okay, hearing none. We can move to deliberation and discussion on the proposal. Yes, commissioners? Yes. Yeah, okay. So let's see, for the standards for amendments, whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive general plan as adopted and amended from time to time by the City Council. We've heard evidence from the staff that this is meant to further retail uses in the downtown district, and that would be in line with the comprehensive general plan. Whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. This seems to be just strengthening the idea that the first floor of downtown uses should be retail as opposed to office, so that doesn't seem to be an issue and is satisfied. Whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties. There's no evidence to that. So that seems to be satisfied. And the adequacy of public facilities and services, that's probably not applicable to our conversation. Are there any comments or questions from the commission with respect to the proposal? Commissioner Draper?
On the financial institution wording, so it says when located above the ground floor or at the ground floor. So that language seems a little bit odd to me because we're just dealing with ground floor. So we're saying if it's okay if they're doing the floor above as well. So, sorry, that's a question for staff.
No, yet, I get what you're saying. So it would be if there is some kind of financial institution that is located above the ground floor, that would include probably a greater variety of financial institutions and not just the retail banking aspect. If there's a financial institution that's going to be on the ground floor, we would want it to just have those retail banking aspects. So we wouldn't want to have investment banking or corporate banking on the ground floor, as that wouldn't encourage pedestrian use. That'd be very specific, used that way. So you've got kind of similar language, I believe, for the office uses and some of our other zoning districts, I think specifically along Central Street.
Okay.
So, yeah, going into this, in this language with respect to permitted uses, we're saying financial institutions are permitted when located above the ground floor or at the ground floor when retail banking services. So I think we can just rework this language to make it a little more clear. If we put like maybe a Romanette before the first one, so like Romanette 1, when located above the ground floor, then comma, or Romanette 2, at the ground floor when retail banking services, such as checking savings accounts, such as checking/saving accounts, debit/credit card uses. And then I think we should change the and ATMs to or ATMs, right? So we're not necessarily saying that they have to provide all of those uses, but just any one of those uses would be acceptable for retail banking services.
So would that mean that a financial institution could have corporate offices on the main floor as long as it had an ATM?
And I think in cases like that, we might be looking more so at the amount of use that is an ATM. So if you've got maybe like a lobby area that's got ATMs and then just small investment banking, but if it's going to be mostly investment banking, if it's going to be 75 or 80% investment banking, and you just have an ATM kind of on the storefront, then that wouldn't.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but that, to me, that's not what that says.
So to address your concern, Commissioner Goddard, if the second part were to say, or at the ground floor, or at the ground floor, when the ground floor is used primarily for retail banking services, so that.
Yes.
Okay. Megan, do you have that to read out to everyone, or do you want me to try to read that out again so so the commissioners can understand what's being changed?
Actually, if you could read it out again, that
Okay.
would be great.
So, under section 611.3.3, permitted uses, the financial institution permitted use would read as follows. Financial institution, open parens, Romanette 1, when located above the ground floor, comma, or Romanette 2, at the ground floor, when the ground floor is primarily used for retail banking services, such as checking savings accounts, debit credit card uses, or ATMs. Or, well, when the R provided doesn't fit the way I read it. Let's see.
Can I add perhaps an amendment to that?
Yes,
Your
please.
amendment?
Yes, please.
It seems to me that we want to have retail banking services, and I would think at a minimum, we'd want to have checking, savings, debit cards, and ATMs. So perhaps we took your language and added, could you read back the Romanette 2, when at the ground floor, provided that primarily retail banking services are included, and those retail banking services at a minimum need to have checking, savings, debit, and ATMs. I'd like to see all three, because ATMs doesn't strike me as, I don't know, to your point, Carol. And so I think your language is saying primarily retail banking, and that retail banking should include at a minimum those three elements, which then will ensure that it's truly a pedestrian attracting facility
So
that we're looking for, versus an office that happens to have an ATM in the corner.
Sure. So the question is, if
What if we
If
just
Bank
took
of-
out ATMs? Because that seems to be the sticking point for me.
I was on the same thinking, like, does ATMs really need to be clarified as a use? Since it's like such a small component of,
Yeah, is the installation of an ATM at the street, on like the facade of a building, is that a zoning issue? Or is ATM within a store, is that a zoning issue? Doesn't seem to me that it would be,
No.
right? So yeah, if we got rid of ATM and just left that in there, I think that would be more clear. Staff, would you have an objection to that? Are there any unintended consequences that we're not thinking of?
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay.
So what would it read like now?
Okay, so financial institution, when located, Romanet 1, when located above the ground floor, or 2, at the ground floor, provided that retail banking services such as checking, savings accounts, debit card uses, or checking, savings accounts and debit/credit card uses are provided.
That's good.
yeah.
Actually, debit, credit card uses, can mean ATM, so it's actually covered by that phrase.
But you've now eliminated your earlier primarily retail banking, which I thought was a good thing to have in there.
I guess I switched the word primarily and said, I guess, yeah, you're right. So if I just by saying provided that doesn't address the primarily.
I think your concept was primarily retail
Yeah.
banking and retail banking, and it needs to include at a minimum those two things.
So when located, or
I don't know.
at the ground floor, provided that ground floor is primarily dedicated to retail banking services. So we're saying the ground floor is primarily dedicated to retail banking services such as checking, savings accounts, debit, credit card uses,
And debit and credit card.
and debit credit card uses. Thank you. All right. Is there a motion to approve the language as butchered by all of us?
So
Commissioner
move.
Hugo? Oh, Goddard? Hugo seconds. Since this is going to the, is there discussion or comments on the motion?
Just that maybe staff would reiterate that language for the special uses, the next section.
Let's see.
So right now it's just saying those are not provided, so we could rework that.
Sure. Yes, the special use section would also be modified to be compatible with what we're saying for the permitted use section. Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to ask one question, and maybe this is looking into this too carefully, but we reference financial institution and then we say retail banking services. Would it be advisable to say retail financial services? Because I'm thinking like investments brokerage that had a retail component to it. I'm trying to think of one around here, but like I know Fidelity has offices where you can actually go and talk to your broker in kind of it almost looks like when you're going to get a mortgage, or it looks like the floor of a bank. And so investments would be a financial institution, investment house, but not necessarily a retail banking service. So I'm just wondering if it should read financial institution outside of the parenthesis as it does, and then inside the parenthesis, instead of retail banking services, make that retail financial services to encompass things other than actual banking.
So a lot of our discussion in the last meeting about this was that since these like, it's really a subset of downtown. It's not the whole downtown area, but it's a subset of downtown. That the goal of that area is to have retail, ground floor retail, and to drive people coming in and out. And so the discussion I got ultimately focused on, okay, well, we don't want just any kind of financial institution on the first floor.
Got it.
But banking services where people are coming in and out, where that can help drive other types of retail. And so, and I'm not going to speak for the commission, but that's where our discussion considered those uses, and at least at that time, the idea was keep those out of this district, except for on floors 2 and above.
Upper floors. Okay. Sounds like the group has already thought about this, so yes.
Any other comments or questions? All right, then, Ms. Jones, if you can take roll.
Commissioner Draper? Yes. Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson? Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Sloss?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Chair Isaac?
Yes.
That passes.
All right, that item passes unanimously, goes to the City Council for discussion. The next order of business is 20 PLND-0002, 2044 Wesley Avenue. This is a zoning ordinance map amendment, removal of the property at 2044 Wesley Avenue from the West Evanston Overlay District. Mr. Mangum, you'll be presenting.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, members of the public. As stated, the request is for a map amendment to remove the West Evanston overlay designation from the subject property. There's a bit of background on this area and planning. There was the West Evanston Master Plan adopted in 2007, which looked at the area along the old Mayfair Railroad right-of-way, running from Green Bay Road down southwest through the city. There are many goals within that plan, including completing the street network to be a grid that goes through where a lot of those streets are disconnected by the former rail right-of-way. Additional goals had to do with housing in the area. A lot of the development that was forecasted was for townhome development and multifamily development in those areas. That plan built off of the Canal, Green Bay Road, Ridge Avenue, Church Street report that was adopted by the City Council in 2005. That was a report that was the subject of the previous Plan Commission meeting that talked about downzoning the area just south of this parcel from the R5 to an R5A district. So the overlay district, the OWE, is a form-based code that was adopted in 2009 to implement the master plan of West Evanston. Again, primarily along the old Mayfair Railroad right-of-way. Called for the location layout of extended public streets, sidewalks, right-of-ways, landscaping, and then specific building types for parcels within that district. And within the form-based code, they're set for regulations for the location, setbacks, height, building types for the buildings. A couple properties that have redeveloped within the overlay so far are Emerson Square, which is a publicly funded development for affordable housing, 32 developments, dwelling units, and multifamily and townhomes. And the YOU building, located across the street from the high school, cultural facility that also complies with the West Evanston district, and then a public utility next to YOU for the substation that met many of the requirements with some variations granted for fencing and landscaping. So the area we're talking about is this area north of the block that you see here between north of Foster, between Jackson and Wesley. This is what the West Evanston Master Plan calls for townhomes in this area. This is how it's shown within the overlay district. And then the legend on here shows the different zoning districts in that area and the building types that would be constructed there. So notably in the parcels that we're discussing tonight is the blue with a new public neighborhood street, which would be an extension of Jackson further north all the way to connect to Simpson, to create that connectivity between Simpson and Foster that does not exist currently. And then a street to connect Wesley and Jackson, where those two terminate currently. The housing type that's called for in that area are townhomes, so townhome type 2 in the area. And then at the corner of Green Bay Road and Simpson, it would be a mixed-use building in that area where there's a self-storage facility presently. Is a page from the overlay district that shows the requirements for the townhouse style 2 development with the heights, floor-to-floor heights of the building, the build-to zone, where it could be located, and some of the transparency requirements for the building type as well. The applicant has proposed to remove this area from the overlay district and has stated to staff that he plans to submit for planned development in the future if the map amendment is approved and is removed from the overlay district. The anticipated plans are for townhomes and for a multi-unit building in this area. And then we have the standards for amendments when we get to that, following the applicant's discussion, a discussion of the public, and discussion of the commission. That concludes the summary of the staff report. Thank you.
Apologies. Are there any questions from the commission of staff's presentation? I have a question. Why does this parcel need to be removed from the overlay district?
It's a request by the applicant, basically that it could not, he can state this better, but it cannot comply with the requirements of the district because it doesn't own the amount of property necessary to develop compliance with the plan.
Okay.
So some of the development that's perceived in that area or anticipated in that area would include the self-storage site to the north.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from the commissioners? Staff? Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Sloss?
So just so I understand kind of the logistical application, so there was a reference in the staff report so if the overlay district is removed from the properties, it indicated that the applicant would follow the West Evanston master plan. So just logistically, like what is covered by the master plan versus is it related to the form-based code that the overlay covers versus the master plan would cover the building types, or can you clarify that?
Sure. The form-based code essentially was to implement the master plan. So it's a more detailed zoning regulations to implement that master plan.
Any other questions at this time of staff? I believe the petitioner's here. Would the petitioner like to make a presentation?
Good evening. I don't know if it'll be a presentation, but just to answer some questions and give you an idea of the overall aspect of what we're trying to achieve.
Could you just introduce yourself?
Sure.
Quickly.
John Cleary is my name. I moved to Evanston in 2013, myself, my wife, and 3 children. I have kids in each of the schools, elementary, middle, and high school. I lived probably 2 blocks away from where this is for 5 or 6 years.
I'm gonna interrupt you for 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm going out of order here for a second. If I could have you and anyone else that plans on asking questions or speaking today, raise your right hand and please swear or affirm that the testimony you're going to give is going to be truthful.
I swear. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
do.
Please.
So, back to kind of what your question, I think what you're trying to get at, and so my understanding of the Evanston Overlay District is it's very restrictive. It says this is exactly what you have to do. And part of the requirement is to create a brand new road at the top of Wesley Avenue linking Jackson Avenue. And the site that we have is probably 100 feet deep. And as you know, a road with sidewalks and everything like that probably takes up 30, I don't know, 6, probably 45, 50 feet. So to try fit a townhouse in behind that would be very, very difficult. So in keeping with the spirit of the West Evanston Overlay District, we came up with a plan to create townhouses along the stretch of land that's there. So the Overlay District calls for type 2 townhouses. So what we're envisaged doing is 2.5 to 3 story tall townhouses. And the apartment building that's on that site is actually in an R5 zoned area. So it's actually not in the West Evanston Overlay District at all. It's actually, so the underlying zoning of the top piece of land where townhouses is, the underlying zoning, my understanding is it's R4, and if the West Evanston Overlay District was removed, we would just look for what we could do as a right under the R4 zoning. So we would meet the same standards for lot area, height requirements, and site coverage. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Well, I guess the question still, a portion of my question still remains as why is this being done in 2 steps as opposed to making an application to remove it from the West Overlay District and a planned development application?
Cost. It would cost approximately over $100,000 to submit a planned development application to the Commission in Evanston. So the safer way for me as the landowner is to remove the district, to remove the overlay map, and then create detailed plans for the City of Evanston and go through the process of a planned development. But for me to go through that planned development process, I'm going to spend over $100,000 just in plans and environmental work and also in civil engineering work. Mm-hmm. So it's really a cost issue more than anything else, you know. But overall, you know, if the city wanted me to say I could only do townhouses here, I'd have no problem saying all townhouses. And it would just be a matter of, it would be, you know, I could sign a statement or give you an undertaking that we'd only do townhouses in this area that is part of the overlay district. I don't know what else I can tell you, you know, but I'm happy to give an undertaking that on this parcel of land that what we would go and proceed with through the plan development process on the area of the overlay is only for townhouses. I could, you know, I could definitely give you that undertaking, shall we call it, you know what I mean? and whatever, whatever we need to appease the city of Evanston to go down that road, because I live in the area, it suits townhouses. The city of Evanston is missing a lot of reasonably priced new construction housing. In the last 10 years, there's been very, very little new construction, affordable, working family houses in Evanston. There aren't any. And it's missing. And I've talked to several people who I go to school with, parents who've moved from other areas, and finding new construction, which has a higher efficiency standards, which is cheaper for cost of living, it's very difficult to find in Evanston. There's tons of apartment buildings. There's all the apartment buildings you want in the world in Evanston, but there's very few new construction houses with homeowners living in them. And I think it's one thing that Evanston misses, that it doesn't have,
Are there any questions from the commission of the applicant?
Yeah.
Commissioner Draper?
Hello. So you've purchased this property and you were aware that it was part of this district when you bought it.
Right.
So what are your plans if this doesn't pass?
To build a road between Wesley and Jackson is not possible. It's just
Right.
prohibitive, number one, and it's not possible.
So you have no plan if it doesn't pass? Or
No plan doesn't pass. No, but I think in the big scheme of things, this piece of land has laid idle for 30 odd years and nothing has happened on it. And the reason nothing has happened on it is because of the previous ownership of it. And what Evanston has done is come over and above and put an overlay on the district. If you remove that overlay, this parcel will get developed. People will come live here. Tax revenue will be generated for the city. People will, it'll be a usable and functioning part of the neighborhood, I think it's reasonable to ask for that,
Commissioner Hugo?
Perhaps I'm asking an uninformed question, but in the materials, it indicates that all of this is only going to work if the storage facility is acquired, and it's currently not for sale.
Correct. But
So is all this contingent on you getting the storage facilities?
the storage facility has nothing to do with what I'm proposing,
Okay.
what I'm asking.
But the development in and of itself, moving forward,
The develop that I'm proposing
does
has
it-
nothing to do with the storage facility, or does not require the storage facility. The West Evanston overlay, to meet the demands of the West Evanston overlay, you would have to have control of the storage facility, plus the car parking lot that's next door to it, that's owned by Walgreens, which is on the opposite side of the road. So you would have to have an accumulation. You'd have to buy the parking lot from Walgreens, and you'd have to have the storage facility as well.
so eliminate, so that getting rid of the overlay, that does not require you to do that, then?
No.
Right.
No.
Okay. At this point, we'll open up the discussion to members of the public. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions of the applicant. It's not time for a comment just yet. If you have a comment, there's going to be an opportunity right after this portion. So if you have questions, you want to elicit more information, now would be the time. There's a sign-in sheet. No one's signed in, but you guys you raise hands, you can come up, and you can sign in afterwards. All right? So who would like to? It's very gentlemanly. Please come up to the lectern and please speak into the microphone.
Hi, my name is Marcus Leckleitner, 1919 Wesley. So I just wanted to clarify a little bit what you were saying. As far as the overlay plan making sense, do you mean that to make financial sense, you would have to have everything so that you then, becomes financially feasible to put in that road? Or,
So my understanding is the way the West Evanston Overlay District is superimposed on top of the overlying zoning on the area, it's essentially they're creating a master plan for this whole area. Part of that master plan for this whole area would require purchase of the self-storage area, purchase of the parking lot that's across the road from the Walgreens, purchase of my property, and adjacent properties all the way down Green Bay Road as well, and then come in and construct a brand-new road linking Wesley to Jackson, which would be over 300 feet.
right,
150, approximately 300 feet of brand-new roadway. So I'm not an expert on cost, but to build 300 feet of brand-new roadway in the city of Evanston, it's not cheap.
right, unless you could basically do all of that and kind of make up for the cost, it's just not, it doesn't make sense, you're saying.
So, but you require, so you'd have to buy the self-storage facility,
Right,
you'd have to buy the parking lot next door across the road from the Walgreens. There's a parking lot there. So you'd have to buy the two of those, and then you would have to build a brand-new road between linking Wesley to Jackson, and then extend Jackson all the way up to, what is that? That is,
Simpson.
no, is it Simpson? To the north?
Okay.
The way the zoning is they've put a blanket overlay over a district, and it runs down further south as well. There's a couple of different districts,
Right.
and this land is sitting idle, it could be put to good use.
Stand, yeah.
And it's Marcus, it's not, I think Tana is the perfect for it, you know what I mean?
No, I mean, I don't disagree, I'm just trying to understand, was the plan completely,
It was
did it
done-
never make sense, or it would just made sense if everything basically fell into place for one?
I think it was done in an era when there was mass development and where things like this could happen because there was a lot of development going on and a lot of money being spent on new construction, on development, and a big plan like this could work if somebody very big came in and bought up everything and did.
Right. You said the townhomes would be affordable. What's your approximate?
I think they're
Idea?
going to be somewhere around 500,000 to 550,000. I think somebody should be able to buy one of these townhouses with a mortgage for $2,000 a month.
Right.
And then plus property taxes and insurance, you know what I mean?
Right, okay.
I think $500,000, 550, somewhere in that sort of ballpark is probably the market price that the market could sustain. There'll be about 2,000 square feet each, 2 parking spaces in the rear,
Right,
front garden on them.
Makes sense.
I think they're reasonable. I have a few pictures here of other similar townhouses done by the same architect. But kind of gives you sort of style and scope, and I think it's in the package or not.
in
I'm not.
Chicago, or?
They're in Chicago, yeah. But again,
So right now, I notice, I walk my dog across that area all the time, because it's a shortcut.
exact, but similar, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I was saying I'm walking my dog across that often nowadays.
Into the microphone,
Oh, sorry,
please.
sorry. And I noticed there's tons of people that cross right now, both from those public housing projects to Green Bay and also to the other side to Walgreens. Ever since I moved here 15 years ago, that would be no longer possible.
It would be possible because on the west side of the property, that would still probably have access to it. I don't own that property. I have an option to buy that property, but I don't own that property.
Oh, okay.
The west side of it,
Right.
running from Simpson,
Jackson.
from north to just west of shall we call it west of Jackson,
Right. Okay.
which is built up with probably 15 feet of waste material that has been lying idle for 20, 30 years. You know what I mean? It was a dumping ground for somebody for a lot of years. So I think what's going to end up happening is the city's going to end up having to foot the bill. If things play out the way they're playing out, so it's kind of, it's in the city's best interest and in the people's best interest for somebody to go in and start the process, develop the property, and then if the development's successful, keep moving it forward and keep moving it further west and assume the responsibility to clean up the rest of the property.
Going from Jackson, though, would you still be able to go, because right now you can basically go through Jackson, it dead ends there, but you can walk through the area afterwards and just come through in between?
You still would. What you don't see on this map is here. At the end of Jackson on the other side is a parking lot that is staff parking for the Walgreens across the other side of the road. And you don't see it on this map, but next time you're driving by there, you'll notice it now because I've told you, which is right beside the public storage area. But that is part of the ownership of Walgreens. So it's, again, another piece of the puzzle for the West Evanston overlay.
But then even aside from that parking, there's a little stretch.
Yes,
next
there's
to
a
it,
little
west of
narrow
it, right
stretch,
where
yes.
okay.
And I think that's a city-owned right-of-way, or the city has a right-of-way over that part of the parcel as well.
Okay.
Okay. We're gonna let someone else ask questions. Please, sir.
No problem.
Sir, if you could. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Masters, 1918 Wesley. I guess I don't understand if the storage facility doesn't go away, you're putting a road between the storage facility and the front of these properties?
You're putting a...
So then you're looking at the storage facility from the front of the house, and the back of the house looks at, I'm not picturing this, and so.
Sure. What we envisage is creating a new private road linking Jackson to Wesley, essentially a private alley or a private road controlled by the development and, paid for by the development. And the parking for each of the townhouses would be off of that alley, so that alley will be between. That's a private alley, shall we call it, a private alley or a private roadway, which I think is the correct terminology with Evanston. It's a private roadway, but essentially it's a private alley. So by it being private, the city doesn't maintain it. The city doesn't have to pay to light it. The city doesn't have to fill the potholes on it. The residents of that area.
Like our alley behind my house.
No, your alley behind the house is the responsibility of the city's.
Okay.
A private alley is kind of slightly different. It's my understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong.
It would seem to me that if it was private, they could put up a gate and prevent people from going around. It seems to me what he's explaining is that the fronts of the townhouses would be south-facing.
Correct.
And so there wouldn't be a road in front of those houses. You'd have to go from a public street to the private sidewalk to get to the townhouses from the front, and there would be a private road, a private alley in the back to be able to access the public streets to the garages in the back.
And then I guess I just wanted to confirm, because I was confused, if this overlay is removed, it doesn't change the zoning requirements of what can be built there? It's really just, and maybe this is to the planning commission, really just the road that's envisioned in that overlay to connect these two streets?
Staff, do you want to?
Sure. So the overlay district does a couple things. It calls out the area for the public roads, and so again, that's in kind of like the medium blue on the diagram up here, and then calls for the regulations for the development as well. So the regulations that townhomes would be there. If that overlay is removed, it would revert to the underlying zoning district, which in this case is R4, which is a multifamily residential district. So the regulations of that district would apply, and there are a variety of housing types that could be built there outside of only townhomes that could be built.
So then it's got the potential to increase the density of the people living there. You could have a bigger apartment complex or something in that versus.
There would definitely be there's a wider array of types of housing. So apartment buildings could be built there, for example, whereas the overlay district essentially has to be the townhomes.
Can I say one point here? The underlying zoning here is R4, which is less than what it is on Wesley, which is currently R5, and what is on Jackson, which is R5 as well, which is a higher density zoning. And a taller zoning is allowed. So it's actually lower density and lower height restrictions than all the properties to the south of it. Does that make sense?
Are there any other? Please come on up.
Hi, Carolyn DeLutri, 1924 Wesley Avenue. Just quick question. So R4 zoning, what is the height restriction?
I'm going from memory, but I think it's 35.
Yeah, 2.5 stories or 35 feet.
And R5 is?
50 feet and 5 stories, R5.
2.5 stories.
And the overlay is 42
Half of the
districts.
3.5.
2.5 and
2.5?
R4.
Okay. Are you going to have any follow-up questions or?
No, I'll probably just have a comment at that.
Okay. Any other questions from the public?
Amy Masters, 1918 Wesley. I was concerned because I know that the old overlay plan called for a certain amount of green space, a certain amount of width between buildings. And I was also concerned because
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is there a question in here?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Will removing the overlay also take out it will also take out the green space requirements? So it'll take out all the things, not just the roads, but everything. And is there a way that we can just say, hey, dude, you don't have to build the road, but everything else applies?
So the first question, it would remove the requirements of the overlay, including like on this diagram where you see the green, the open space there. So as I think as Chair Isaac asked a question earlier, one of the ways to tie the two together would be through a simultaneous application for a map amendment and a plan development. At that point, you'd be approving a plan development, and that plan development would have a plan that would show exactly what would be on there and would be approved as hand in hand as a part of that.
So there's no way to, at this point, there's no way just to exempt him from just part of the plan. You'd have to exempt him from the whole plan in that area. I guess I'm
the other
concerned
option
because
would be the only other option would be to amend the plan, or either amend the plan or remove the property from the plan. Those would be the two options of providing the applicant with some relief. There might be some others, but I believe those would be the two main ones.
Right, and as far as the building itself, the applicant could ask for variations from the plan through the variance process. However, the location of public streets is only allowed to be adjusted by, I think, 10 feet from the center line of the street. So that's really where the crux of it, the public improvements there, and essentially where that blue, where the new street, the new east-west connection is proposed in the zoning district, is the location where the applicant owns and is proposing to put townhomes.
Still confused.
All right, please come on up.
Sorry.
Just introduce yourself again and.
Carolyn DeLutri, 1924 Wesley Avenue. Just a question. So if it gets removed from the overlay district and then it becomes a planned unit development, then there can be variances. He can request variances regarding height, correct?
Yes, through the plan development process, there would be the ability to ask for site development allowances, which are essentially variances from code requirements.
Okay, so today he's asking just to be removed, but then there's no guarantee that once, if you do vote to do that, then he's not going to come back and say, guess what, I got this property and I want to go this high now. So, okay, I just wanted to understand that.
Okay. Okay, it looks like we've exhausted the questions from the public. At this point, you can take a seat, please. Thank you very much. The members of the public can make comments with respect to this application. I'm just going to go in order of the people that signed up, and then if there's any others that didn't sign up but would like to make comment, I'll open it to you as well. Mr. Leckleidner, did I pronounce that well? Do you have any comment? Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Masters, please come up to the.
I guess for me, my concern is one that you've raised at the start. Again, Jeff Masters, 1918 Wesley Avenue. Of what happens, why are you coming in two parts? And I understand why monetarily. I just worry that we take away the overlay and something happens to you and you decide to sell your property and now we have some new person. I might trust you that you were only going to put in this kind of development in this area, but I feel very uncomfortable without having some other weight with the city, because we went through a lot of process back in the day to come up with this overlay. We had the whole community together. I was part of those meetings. We were in the Fleetwood Germain. We were putting housing things together. It was a pretty big deal. So removing it quickly without some kind of study or additional plan just doesn't seem to make sense to me, given what we went through in the past. And it's just more of a commitment from me as a property owner and homeowner and the city with this is what we're planning to do and we'll involve you in the process. So that's it for my comment.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. DeLucci?
Yes, thank you. Carolyn DeLutri, 1924 Wesley Avenue. I spoke at the last Plan Commission meeting. I'm also the former executive director of Downtown Evanston. And so I just really want you to consider when you're looking at this area of development, really the character of the neighborhood and what it is now. The study that was done back in 2005. Obviously, we're now here in front of you again with another potential development, and it's not fitting in within what the plan was back in 2005. And I believe Commissioner Halleck at the last meeting, after it was voted down to downzone the area, he said, this really has to be studied again. And, the city's comprehensive plan has not been looked at or updated for 20 years. This has been 15 years. There's pressure of development within a residential area where in the 2005 study, it says to downzone this area, to maintain the character of the residential neighborhood. And so I just really want to remind everybody of that. We know that the next process is going to planning and development, and we will continue with our recommendation to the city council to look at restudying this area and really let's bring the community together and look at it and see. So obviously, again, this is a parcel of an area that there was a proposed idea for this area. And now if these townhomes get built, then all of a sudden, what if the storage place comes up for sale? What if the parking lot that Walgreens owns comes up for sale? We've now ruined any opportunity to plan this out into something that fits within the neighborhood. And I just recommend that you don't look at piecemealing everything, but let's look at it as an area, and maybe it's time to restudy it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Masters?
I guess I want to tell you about Fifth Ward meetings. and this all involves the Fifth Ward. There's a lot of resentment in the Fifth Ward towards developers. And you hear over and over and over of broken promises in the past for that area. This, I think, if we don't restudy it, if we don't involve the community in what we're going to do with this, what you're going to do with this area, I think you're going to have a lot of issues with the Fifth Ward. That's just from what I've heard from, they're very angry still. From 1960s, they're mad. So I think you need to consider the whole area and the people of that community and not impact them with people. Do you know what I mean? Because the density, the stress on the streets and in parking and all of that, I think needs to be looked at before you decide to change anything that you made on the master plan of Evanston.
Thank you. Is there any other member from the public that would like to speak? Please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christopher Gottschall. I'm 1910 Wesley. And I just want to reiterate what several people have said. It feels like we're making some decisions about this area, both at the last meeting and this meeting, based on studies that are 20 years old, or plans that are 20 years old, studies that are 15 years old. And I'm wondering if we need new data, new information, so we can make better informed decisions about what's going on in this area. There's obviously a lot of tension with the neighbors there, and I'm not saying that this plan for townhomes isn't a great plan, but I feel like part of what the overlay was trying to address was potential issues of density, and that's why, additional streets and turning Jackson into a two-way street, and those things were things that the overlay was trying to address. Those issues of density, if we bring that density in and don't also address some of these other issues that, like Jackson being a one-way narrow street, it's going to cause all kinds of problems in that area, and we don't want to ruin our neighborhood with density that hasn't been properly planned for. So I think new studies are definitely a good idea. Thanks.
Sir, excuse me, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. All right, is there anyone else from the public that would like to make any comment with respect to the presentation? At this time, it's well within your right to come up and give a response or a summary conclusion if you'd like. Otherwise, we can pass and move on to deliberation.
Just briefly, the part of the parcel that we're taking the overlay off, doesn't restrict the extension of Jackson. I'm actually part of the plan that we submitted or that we're proposing extends Jackson a little bit further and paid for by myself. And as mentioned earlier, I've no problems committing to, in the part of the overlay that we're removing, committing to just doing townhouses. The number of them is what's out there in the underlying zoning. That's just the number that's there. You know what I mean? But I have no problems committing to that. The density further south, which was addressed, I think, at the last planning meetings, where the R5 zoning to the south of here is an extremely dense zoning, and it's allowed as a right. This is not. It's a lower zoning. It allows less units, less height restrictions than the other units. So that's my only comments. Okay.
Thank you. All right, that will close the public testimony for this case. Are there any questions from the commission of staff or the petitioner?
I have a question. How much of the West Evanston Overlay District has been developed according to that plan?
I believe that was covered earlier, just 3 developments that we're aware of since the plan has
yeah,
been
that's right.
covered. So it's the Emerson Square, which was fairly substantial development, and then the YU and the substation that are a part of that block just west of Dodge on Church Street. So, I mean, with this plan, there are a large number of sizable parcels, and some of those that have been available and that are available now. There have not to date been many large parcels that have been aggregated and redeveloped. And some of that may have to do with market conditions. Some of it has to do with a TIF was developed and established in this area at the time. Property values have not substantially increased since that period. So there's not been the tax increment to do some of the potential acquisition or public improvements that were anticipated at the time of the creation.
Commissioner Draper?
As far as this road element of this development, would there be any potential for that to be some like private-public partnership with the city of Evanston and the developer? It does seem like quite a restriction to place on a developer that they have to do a public street. Or does it, was that part of the Emerson Square development? Was that a private street or was that public? Is there precedent for that?
Yeah, I can check on that. I think it is a complicating factor depending on the parcel and how much of the parcel is scheduled for right-of-way, essentially.
Right.
That some of the parcels, and like this one included, the majority of the parcel itself is scheduled to be right-of-way in the plan.
But would the developer need to actually build the street itself or just the right-of-way?
I think that would be a discussion with the city or a negotiation with the city, depending on funding to some degree.
Usually the developer has to build it and then build it per city requirements and then dedicate it to the city.
Depending on the size of the project, I would expect it on certain size projects and maybe not necessarily on something that's in the overlay district, but that's what I'm trying to understand.
Any questions or comments? Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for staff. I'm reading the West Evanston master plan, and I'm wondering, I'm looking specifically at the 5 guiding principles, and if the overlay is removed and this development goes forward, I'm wondering, in their professional opinion, how that would affect the principle number 1, reconnect the community, complete terminating streets and sidewalks, and remove old railroad retaining walls. And number 3, increase the walkability of the neighborhood. So providing a walkable block pattern with continuous and wide sidewalks and provide safe passage for bicyclists. So I'm just wondering if this development, if the overlay is removed and this development goes forward, it seems like what we're talking about is, does that mean the extensions of the road, north-south, less likely to happen? The extension of the road, the east-west road, will not happen. And how will that impact connectivity of this neighborhood, isolation of this neighborhood, walkability, and those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, I believe it'd certainly be compromising those goals to some extent. The plan as shown here would extend Jackson somewhat further north to connect with the proposed development, but not all the way up to Simpson. It would not necessarily, that could be possible in the future, although it would take additional property acquisition, as the applicant mentioned. It also would create some sort of connection between Wesley and Jackson as in a 24-foot private drive. However, certainly not to the standards that the plan or the overlay district anticipated. Because part of the overlay and having the standards is not just to have the connectivity and have the housing types and building types in there, but to orient those building types towards the public right-of-way to really be developing or redeveloping in more of a traditional neighborhood design, the way the street grid is in most places in Evanston. So certainly the development as proposed would compromise some of those goals while still achieving some to a lesser extent.
Thank you.
So what do the commissioners think about selective removal of a parcel from the overlay district? I mean, looking at the overlay area, as it extends, not just on this map, but all the way down, it is a bit, I don't want to say haphazard, but it's not one contiguous block, right? The main driver there, I believe, are these old right-of-ways that serve as like the backbone for a lot of this West Overlay District. But what do the commissioners think about the prospect of removing, one parcel from the overlay district, and what does that do to the other parcels that remain, right? So the self-storage area, or the parking lot for Walgreens, or any of these other parcels that we are not considering today, but by agreeing to remove this parcel, we are, affecting the viability of those areas for what the master plan calls for. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think we have to consider, has this overlay district accomplished its goals? And if not, then this isn't a problem. If it has, then we probably shouldn't.
Isn't that a bigger discussion? Isn't that?
You're asking whether we should remove it, and I think that's germane to your question.
I guess my response, or my responsive question would be, why would we consider removing one parcel that isn't necessarily like at the end? It basically makes up the central area of this portion of the overlay district. And so, it's removing one parcel would seem to me to be compromising the balance of this portion of the West Overlay District. I mean, do you agree? Do you disagree? I'm sorry. The time for if we have questions, we'll provide.
Correctly describing the amount of area that's being removed.
Okay. Please.
I think to your question, if we remove that parcel, it will be very difficult to replicate this, to make this plan reality. But is it fair to say that this plan was done 15 years ago and it hasn't been developed because some of these parcels are not free to be developed? So I think what the applicant is trying to get here is they're trying to make this work for now. And should we think that this isn't going to work? Because we don't know when those parcels will ever be developed. So rather than leaving it be vacant, should we try and figure out how to do this process without that?
Well, I'll say candidly that what's been diagrammed as the proposal for what, what the applicant thinks that their development's going to look like, I think it's a smart use of space, and I think it, I think if done right and brought here before us, I could easily see myself supporting it. But I'm having an issue with doing it piecemeal and removing this parcel and not knowing exactly what we're going to be doing with it. And so, I think that's ultimately my hang up with this application, is that we'd be doing one step without the other, and the one step is compromising the integrity of the overlay district. And so if I'm going to support that, I think that I need to see not just the first step, but also the second step. But I don't know, what do you, Mr. or Commissioner Johnson?
I agree with those points, the piecemeal nature and I do understand it's less expensive to do it this way from the developer's perspective, but removing the overlay does allow a great bit of uncertainty. As one of the residents mentioned, the developer could sell the property. The developer we're allowing a greater deal of uncertainty, and to have the request for the removal of the overlay connected in tandem with the site development plan would be give greater assurance to the residents and to this body as far as what actually is going to get built there. So I do agree with the 2 points that you just made.
Any other comments from commissioners? Should we look at the standards?
I have one more.
Yeah, Commissioner Draper.
I think onto that point that once you get to the further along with the site development, I mean, you should be able to work with the city of Evanston to give a little bit more guidance on the road aspect. Maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be a private drive, but it would be dedicated. So what would be the difference? Like, we have those discussions. Maybe there could be a public partnership, those sorts of things. I think this development could work as well. You are having a connection here between two roads, but it's just, we can't guarantee that this is what will get built. So it's pretty difficult to discuss it, removing it right now, because we don't know that's what's going to happen. So I agree on that perspective.
Okay. These are the standards for amendments. Whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive general plan as adopted and amended from time to time by the City Council. Well, this is we're obviously removing this from the application is to remove it from the overlay district, but not the comprehensive
Right.
plan. So, Commissioner Goddard, do you think that this application satisfies it? That removing the property from the overlay district.
Well, it's developing the property as townhouses, which is what.
But we're not. But that's not the. I mean, that's not the application today, right? I mean, we're literally just removing it from the plan. We're basically scrapping the West Evanston plan for this parcel. I suppose it's, I see your point that it could be satisfied. I'm not sure that I'm convinced. Is there any other comments from commissioners with respect to that standard?
I mean, I think this kind of gets at the points that have been raised, which are, if it was then developed as townhomes, then it would potentially be in consistent with the comprehensive plan and with the overlay district, but there's no guarantee of that. So we're not voting on whether it's, on this townhome proposal. So I don't think there's a guarantee that it would be consistent necessarily.
Whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. Well, we're not changing the zoning, right, but we are removing the property from the overlay, which would give this parcel different rights than the surrounding property. That being said, the underlying zoning, I believe the testimony was that it was R4. I don't see that being much different than what is in the overlay. So I would look at this as satisfied. Any comments or disagreements from commissioners? Okay, whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties. Well, I would say that there is the possibility of that, right? We've discussed the effect that removing this parcel and developing this parcel without the other portions of the overlay district in play could adversely affect those properties. The removal of the plan for extending streets could have an effect on adverse effect on adjacent properties, but there's been no testimony to that effect. Again, I would look at this and say that it's unknown. Yeah. The adequacy of public facilities and services. I don't see that this is applicable, but okay. So with that, are there any final comments or deliberations from commissioners?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I'm not sure that the West Overlay District, and I do remember when that was passed, and there were a lot of marvelous goals to it. I'm not sure it's been effective, and Scott, your comment that the TIF district was completely unsuccessful. So, if we don't do something to develop this property, is it going to sit around for another 10, 15 years?
Any other comments or points of discussion? All right. Since we'll be sending this to City Council. That's absolutely correct. Can we have a motion, please?
I move just have the discussion.
A motion to approve the application.
Approve the application, yeah.
Okay. Second, Goddard. All right. Now, since it's going to the city council, we will take it by roll.
Commissioner Draper?
No.
Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
No.
Commissioner Sloss?
No.
Commissioner Hugo?
Aye.
Chair Isaac?
No.
Okay, that motion fails 2-4.
Okay. Next order of business is, I believe, public comment. Is there anyone here that has anything to say that, with respect to an item that has not been discussed today? Hearing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Johnson? Goddard, second. All in favor? Aye. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.